What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Greetings and salutations. Jeffrey Wilson coming at you one more time with another episode of the Conspiracy Farm, SWAPCAST style this time. I am, as always, with my co-host, partner in crime, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich, and today we are talking a little climate change with the host of the Corbett Report, James Corbett, as well as the host of the Ripple Effect podcast with Ricky Varandas. If you didn't know, the website is up, www.theconspiracyfarm.com. And without further ado, enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
The first thing I'll do is just recommend people, if you haven't yet, please go to CorbettReport.com/bigoil. That is my How and Why Big Oil Conquered the World documentaries, which is the big overview picture. It's one of the most important things I've ever done. So if you haven't watched it yet, or listened to it yet, or read it yet, shame on you. It's 100% for free. And it represents essentially a decade of research, trying to distill it into a narrative that I hope makes sense. But yes, this narrative takes us essentially from the 19th century and the development of the oil industry into the current day and age of climate change hysteria, into the future of technocracy. And these are all related items, and there's some very extremely important historical linkages that we can paint between this. And so one of them is the concept of eugenics, which, for people who don't know, late 19th century, basically the British gentlemen scientists of the time decided that, you know what, I think we are the natural rulers of the world because our genetics make us that way. And genetics was, well, gene had not quite been discovered by that point, but the principle of hereditary traits being passed on was starting to be developed by Mendel and others looking at pea pods. And they said, well, pea pods, humans, it's the same thing. And yeah, genetic traits, well, that must include the fact that poor people tend to have poor children. Why? Because they have bad genes, of course. And rich people have rich children because we have the superior genes and we're designed to rule over you. So this was a mindset that was that took off in the late 19th century, developed in the early 20th century. It started in England. It moved over to America in the early 20th century. Charles Davenport and people like this were propounding it. And it became exceptionally popular. It was the rock star super science of the early 20th century in a way that we can't fathom unless we put it into the current 21st century context. Basically, it was the climate change science of the early 20th century. Everyone who was anyone and had to at least mouth the words, oh, eugenics, oh, we must be concerned about these poor people breeding too much. And how do we get the best people to breed together, the rich? That was the concern of everyone who was anyone at that time. And that was, as I show in the Big Oil documentary, it was fostered and inculcated and propounded by the oligarchs who had consolidated so much power in the 19th century because, hey, they were at the top of the heap at this point. So, hey, yeah, it's because we have great genes or whatever. It was their self-justification in a scientific age for what in a previous age would have been the divine right of kings or whatever. God made us into rulers of the world.
Now it's the Kardashians and the Jenners.
Yeah, well, those are the that's the puppets that are thrown out on the stage for people to gawk over. And oh, look, they're rich and famous, and that's what we have to aspire to. Whereas the people with real power and control are literally making the money, literally printing the money into existence. So money in of itself is almost meaningless. It's just points on the scoreboard, as it were. So we have to understand those roots because throughout the early part of the 20th century, as I say, it developed and everyone who was anyone was writing about it and talking about it and thinking about it. There was entire scientific societies dedicated to the study of eugenics and how do we limit the poor population and how do we foster the rich population?
Going as far as creating sterilization laws in the early 1900s. Sterilization laws.
This was a huge part of the story in the United States, in a number of countries, even here in Japan. I think I remember reading recently the last sterilization took place in the 1990s Was it here or in Alberta? Anyway,
they're sterilizing people in Africa now with the.
They certainly are, but I mean the on the books, on the records, we are going to sterilize you kind of things, not the programs that they are still running on the entire human population, given, I mean, the fact that sperm counts have dropped 50% in the past half century. Yeah, you think there's some sort of sterilization program going on? I think so. Anyway, but the on the records books of sterilization programs that was passed in many states in the United States, for my American friends out there, was an exceptionally important part of that program. But that eugenics movement that started in Britain, was fostered in America, got taken up in Germany and got mixed up with some other kind of Aryan pure race ideas, and the
Kaiser Wilhelm
kind of made
Institute.
it look like a bad thing. Oh, damn them! They made eugenics sound like a bad thing, and everyone equates now eugenics with Nazis. So we have to drop that word. And the eugenicists were explicitly aware of this. They wrote about it openly, talked about it in their journals and in their conferences at the time. Eugenics is a dirty word. We have to change the name. I mean, we're not going to change the idea. The idea is still exactly the same. We need to sterilize and limit the poor population. We need to foster the rich population. But we can't say that openly anymore.
Which by 1945, 400,000 Germans were sterilized. So they were well on their way.
Well, and the ones that are able to reproduce, you just Planned Parenthood the hell out of them, right?
Exactly right. And Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenicist, talked openly about it, well documented, but now we hand people awards, the Sanger Award for being, a brave woman or whatever it is, to people like Hillary Clinton. Yay. So it's all this rich tapestry that most people, that has been deliberately precluded from our education. No one learns about eugenics anymore. I remember a decade ago talking to a person here in Japan who I'd met who had studied, I think, to the master's level in genetics. And I broached the topic of eugenics, and he literally had not even heard the word eugenics before. That's
possible.
And he's a geneticist.
That's horrific. But this is the master's level education.
He's a geneticist and hadn't heard of eugenics.
Nope.
Wow.
He literally asked me, "What's eugenics?"
Well, I highly recommend people.
This is the state of education at this point.
A great documentary on this topic, and I think this was years ago. James brought it up either on my show or some other discussion. MAFA 21, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but MAAFA 21.
AFA.
Yeah, and it's in my on my YouTube channel, in my documentary playlist. It's an amazing documentary. I put all these it's amazing how many of these documentaries get pulled. I have this playlist on YouTube where I have a bunch of free documentaries on YouTube, and I'm always adding stuff. And people are always hitting me up. They're like, "Hey, a bunch of stuff's missing. A bunch of stuff's missing." And it's like every time I go in there, it says deleted, video. And that's one of them that keeps disappearing. And I luckily keep
imagine that.
Sources. But it's a great. I mean, it really goes into how eugenics really was just a bullshit science that was used to justify racism, basically, or classism, maybe
racism, classism, any ism that propounds the status quo and the rich who are already in charge of the system. But the point of this, in terms of the climate change debate, is that, as I say, in the 50s, they were openly talking about how do we make eugenics into crypto-eugenics, eugenics by another name. And the first idea that they hit on was population control. That was the moniker that they embraced, and so you get J.D. Rockefeller III and the Population Council. Literally, I mean, again, the oligarch families literally founding and funding these organizations into existence.
Right.
And the Population Council was, of course, concerned about overpopulation in these third world countries, too many poor people. We need to improve life, of course. And this always takes the form of, as you mentioned, covert sterilization programs in Africa and India and other places, sometimes quite overt. But anyway, this is the...
Pruitt-Igoe, St. Louis. Sorry? Pruitt-Igoe, St. Louis. It's a community here in St. Louis that had biological and chemical testing on it as well as sterilization.
Yeah. Like
was that the 60s?
And many other such ignominies of American medical history. But the point is, from that point, it started to merge with the environmental movement, which was really getting going at that time. You have, was it Rachel Carson, The Silent Spring, and things like this. We're fostering an awareness of ecosystem, and we're part of a planet, and it's a life support system for the planet, and we have to balance it. The crypto-eugenicists latched onto that. I mean, for one thing, reading the tea leaves, seeing which direction the wind is blowing, people are involved, interested in this movement. It has that kind of grassroots feel to it. But you have literally the World Wildlife Fund and these other, the Nature Conservancy, these big groups that were extremely well funded because they were founded by the literal card-carrying eugenicists of old, literal eugenics society heads and people like not Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley.
Yeah,
anyway,
UNESCO, absolutely.
UNESCO literally helped found WWF, along with, of course, the British royalty and Dutch royalty and others behind Royal Dutch Shell, for example. I mean,
like
again,
said,
it's
literally
the oligarchs, literally the eugenicists becoming the environmental movement. And
well, yeah, you have to put sheep's wool over the evil plan.
Of course.
That was very obvious.
This is an important point. Just because they took over and managed and steered this environmental movement doesn't mean that environmentalism or being concerned about the planet is a bad thing. No, on the contrary, it means that is a natural human tendency. We want to take care of the planet, and they're going to use that urge by misdirecting that urge into unproductive ways or counterproductive ways, like the modern environmental movement, which does not talk about genetic modification. It does not talk about EMF and wireless radiation and these types of extremely important environmental concerns. No, it is 100% carbon dioxide. Not even greenhouse gases in general, of which carbon dioxide is a tiny fraction. No, carbon dioxide is almost exclusively. And why is that? That is because it is the choke point of the industrial economy. If you want a developed industrial economy, you need carbon to produce carbon dioxide at this point. So if you can demonize that, you demonize the entire economic system as it stands. That is the underlying economic basis for the crypto-eugenic movement that is this hijacked environmental movement. And that's leading us into technocracy, the world of the future, where everything will be cracked down on to the point where all of our energy will be controlled and actually used as a currency. That is where this is going.
But before we jump into technocracy, though, I want to make sure we cover cats, because like you said, under the auspices of these certain organizations, UNESCO, IPCC, et cetera, you have all these kind of umbrella organizations, and somebody who was hugely a part of that was a gentleman by the name of Maurice Strong. If you can break down a little bit who he is and how he has been huge as far as facilitating this agenda.
If you just read the basic biographical breakdown of Maurice Strong, there is no way that you cannot be a little bit overwhelmed. Like, how on earth did this happen? A junior high school dropout. He was from a poor family in rural Manitoba that was suffering from the Great Depression when Strong was born. And he went on to organized the Stockholm Environmental Conference, found as the founding director of the United Nations Environment Program. He was the Secretary General of the Rio Earth Summit. He was the founder of the Earth Council and the Earth Charter Movement, the chair of the World Resources Institute, commissioner of the World Commission on Environment and Development. I could go on and on. Like, you can literally go on for paragraphs just citing his various titles and positions. And oh yeah, one other thing. He was a self-made millionaire by his late 20s in the oil patch in Alberta, with a lot of help from Rockefeller and Rockefeller Associates at Standard Oil. Wow, strange. A literal oil man who made his wealth in the oil trade is the person who is one of the leading lights of late 20th century environmental movement. Isn't that strange? Doesn't that ring any bells for anyone or make any sort of alarm noises? It does for me.
Sounds like Al Gore.
The more you look into Maurice Strong, the crazier the story is. Not even talking about his aunt Anna Louise Strong, who was this communist who consorted with Lenin and Mao. She ended up in China, where Maurice Strong ended up at the end of his life as he was disgraced in the oil for food scandal and with Iraq and all of that. That's all another crazy sidebar to this story, although obviously some important points in there to be made. But Maurice Strong and his shepherding of this environmental movement into this international organization or organizations, interlocking organizations, to be presided over by the loving arms of the United Nations under this Earth Charter, which is has often been compared, I believe it was either by himself or by Mikhail Gorbachev, who was one of the other writers of the Earth Charter, compared it to the Ten Commandments. This is the Ten Commandments for the for the modern age, about how the Earth, we have to worship the Earth and blah blah blah.
Gaia
worship.
worship.
Craziness. It's
something to think about, like the weird contradiction, like you said, Maurice Strong being the head of Petro Canada while spearheading, basically all of this climate change conversation. It really is interesting because something not to overlook, and I kind of wanted to start out with this, how you have so many of these oligarchs, these oil tycoons who have divested trillions and trillions of dollars from the oil and put that into this new technology, sustainable development, and technocracy, et cetera. Talk about that if you don't mind. I mean, I don't mean to throw in too much in the middle of things, but how these families are already ahead of the game and divesting so much and already invested huge in this new evolution.
It's an extremely important point because the oligarchs, as I call them, have known for some time now that they are hated, that the public understands the game, that the game is for control over energy, and that the oligarchs won it in the late 19th century and have been using that power and money for political influence for the past century in various ways. And the public has identified that and understands it. Big oil is a bad thing. That is not a controversial statement with most people these days. But having understood that, well, what is the way to get around that? It is, of course, to lead the anti-big oil movement. You get in front of the wave and lead it and, again, push it in the direction that you want. So now, as you say, big news several years ago, the Rockefellers are now completely divested from oil. And look, they've unloaded billions and billions of dollars and all their shares and things. Well, they might have some shares here and there, but they're mostly divested from oil. So look, this is good. We're winning, right? The people are winning. Big oil is going down. But wait, what's coming along to replace the old big oil monopolies? What is the vision of the future that we're being offered? And the vision of the future is increasingly a completely interconnected 5G run smart grid, Internet of everything, Internet of things, in which every object that is manufactured will have its own IPv6 address and an embedded RFID chip or some other equivalent that will be constantly communicating data about you and your daily activities to the network, through the network, for the purpose of controlling every single interaction and transaction that every single human being on the earth has. And why is this? It's because, well, they want to make a better earth for us, guys. They want to reduce our carbon footprint and make sure that everyone's happy and they can balance it all. It's nonsense when you really break it down, but it is appealing nonsense because it is being cloaked in this green garb. You care about the planet, right?
Right.
So you've got to give them this kind of control.
Pat, you're muted, buddy. Can't hear you, boss. Patrick J. can't hear you.
When we talk about these oligarchs divesting billions upon billions of dollars and getting into the green movement and everything else, look, ultimately, it's still the peasants around the world that are funding it through higher taxation and everything else on every gallon of gas that we buy, all natural gas that we use, heating fuel, everything else that we touch that has anything to do with fossil fuels. We are paying the price for it. And in the end, when I drive across Western Iowa and I see hundreds of giant windmills that are, they're not going to pay for themselves for hundreds of years. They're all going to fall down before they pay for themselves because they're so far away from the grid. They had to pay so much money to friggin' tie them together that we're going to end up being charged even more for what they call green energy, when in the end, every person individually should be trying to figure out a way to put solar panels on their roof, a windmill in their yard, dig their own well, and become completely independent from the system and sell energy back to the grid, which in the end, we would probably be charged tax for not using it in the first place because they have to tax us.
It's mind-boggling, the layers of control here. And let's add another layer onto this, because of course one of the reasons that we are told that gas prices just keep rising and rising and rising forever, seemingly, is because of course we're running out of oil, right? And how do we know this? Because of Hubbert's peak. M. King Hubbert came up with the peak oil theory back in the 1950s for Shell. Actually, he was working for Shell as a geologist at the time, and he came up with this theory. Well, look, production increases like this, and eventually we're going to tap out, and eventually production will stop. And the funny thing is about Hubbert's peak and the famous curve that everyone's seen is that there's actually no data whatsoever behind it. It is a heuristic tool. He says, well, it must be like this, and he arbitrarily set the dates, which, by the way, was 2000, right? So obviously, there's no more increase in oil production since 2000, right? Oh, wait. Right. Some problems there. But the interesting thing about this is M. King Hubbert, best known for Hubbert's peak oil, was in the 1930s a co-founder of Technocracy Inc., which was the technocracy movement created by Howard Scott, who is a charlatan, a crank, who came up with this idea that was, very appealing to the elite.
Out of Columbia University.
They were in the basement of Columbia University for about a year before they got kicked out because it was discovered Howard Scott was a charlatan and didn't have any degree, so they kicked him out. But they were in the basement of Columbia along with IBM, by the way, which was developing some of the latest computer technology in the basement of Columbia, right alongside Technocracy at the time. But they were propounding this idea that we can solve all problems, social, political, economic, everything, as long as you have scientists and engineers and economists and professionals in charge. We don't want politicians. We want professionals, technocrats, to run this system. And the technocrats, if you give them enough data, can do anything. So go back and read the Technocracy Study Course, which was the founding document of Technocracy Inc. It was penned by M. King Hubbert, Hubbert's peak, M. King Hubbert. And it lists this crazy wish list of things that they basically want to be able to do. 24/7 total surveillance of the economy. Everything that's bought, everything that's sold, everything that's manufactured. How much energy did it take to manufacture it? What was paid for it? How is it being used? When is it depleted? They wanted total surveillance of everything in the world, which in the 1930s is total crackpot nonsense. What on earth are they thinking? In 2019, well, let's do it. We can do
going
that.
back to what Pat was just saying about
smart grid, we got 5G, we got the Internet of Things.
Yes.
We can do this, guys.
So that's the next level, like what the next evolution is going to go, and what Pat was saying about how we're going to be paying for this. This is a whole revamping of the whole economic structure, this post-carbon world. Talk to me, if you will, about basically the essence of this, which is what you just said, a resource-based economy versus an energy-based economy, and how that's going to just change the whole game.
So you can go back, I think 2014 or so. Christina Figueres, who at that time was high up in the UN CCCC, the UN Climate Change Committee, essentially, bureaucracy. She was saying that we are proposing nothing less than a fundamental change in the economic development model of the world. It has, up to this point, for the last few hundred years, we've been under capitalism. We are going to, for the first time in human history, deliberately and methodically change that development model. Well, what are they changing it into? That's the real question. And as you raise the specter there, it is a resource-based economy. This is the underlying idea of technocracy, in which we don't use currency, pieces of paper printed up by a government based on gold reserves or something, or based on nothing, as is the case these days. Well, what's the point of that? No. We need to engineer an economic model in which currency is literally energy. Literally, your currency will be measured in joules, and you will be allotted a certain number of joules per week, per month, per year, whatever it is, from the technate, which was the name of the political institution that the technocrats are going to institute. The engineers and scientists and brilliant people, don't worry, guys, they're specialists, and they don't have any agenda or plan other than your self-interest, of course. And they're going to decide, okay, this is how much energy we're producing, and this is how much energy we need. So you're going to get this much energy. This is your allotment. These are your credits, and you can spend these in the economy any way you wish, guys.
And like you said, they know about that. They know how much credits to issue you by the consumption they've been measuring from your smart meters, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly, and they would never lie about things like that. that, right?
No.
They would never, for example, purposefully reduce your carbon rations more and more, or your energy rations, so that you basically have a peasant population under the thumb of these technocrats and the people who are puppeteering them. Never.
This is like straight neo-feudalism. I mean, this is like a new...
It is straight neo-feudalism.
Yes.
This is the
and wealth
vision
redistribution at a global level.
I will lay out the vision, the ultimate end vision of the world and the way it would look under this system, which is to have masses of people packed into these dense urban areas in which, of course, everything is surveilled and controlled 24/7, everything monitored.
Yep.
Carbon credits are allowed for certain daily activities, but they'll be gradually reduced. So it is essentially a urban peasant population. And meanwhile, vast territories of the earth, vast swaths of the globe, the natural resources and abundant wealth of the earth will be administered by the technate. They will take over these areas in the name of saving the planet and being good to nature and blah, 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 whatever rhetoric they have to put on top of it. But those will be no-go zones for the regular public. You won't even have access to vehicles that could get you there, because
this is straight. I've said this before on the show, bro. This is straight Judge Dredd. I'm a comic book fan. Judge Dredd back in the 80s, where everything was mega cities, which you just described. These big urban cities where everybody's got credits and this and that. And anywhere outside it, they call it the cursed earth. Like, oh my God, nobody goes to the cursed earth, because clearly that's being monitored by the people who have our best intention. So let me ask you, man, just as so many of these companies, huge companies, got ahead of the curve on climate change, et cetera, and divested as a part of this technocracy, how is that with the financial system, blockchain, Bitcoin? When you got the Federal Reserve, you got so many of these huge banks that are already getting their stuff ready for blockchain in a basically a cashless society. This is essentially kind of a merging of these, from cash to social, et cetera, et cetera. This is just, like you said, straight technocracy all day.
Yeah. But interestingly, you say blockchain, Bitcoin, blockchain, as if they're interchangeable.
That's true.
They're
true.
different. They're
digital currency being run and monitored on this blockchain. But
So
I mean, yeah, you're right. It's not mutually exclusive.
So I detail that point in an episode of my podcast called The Bitcoin PSYOP, where I differentiate between the two and explain why we are being conditioned in our minds to just accept, oh, Bitcoin, blockchain, whatever. Whenever you see blockchain, think Bitcoin. Whenever you see Bitcoin, think blockchain. It's because they want those concepts wedded so that they can introduce all sorts of new ideas, innovative ideas for how they're going to better run the global financial system based on this amazing new blockchain technology. You've heard about it, guys. You know, Bitcoin or whatever. Yeah, you've heard about it. It's good. It's cool. It's the way of the future. Meanwhile, they're going to completely 100% pervert the original idea of cryptocurrency and what it was meant to do, which was to undermine the central banks themselves, to present an international method of exchange that does not require or even allow central banks to operate. They're going to take that, make private blockchains that are nationally administered and probably administered by central banks themselves, and present that to the public as, this is digital cryptocurrency, guys. You can take these wallets that the government will issue you, and we'll use this in the future. This is where things are going, and the real danger about that is, of course, is that the blockchain is not anonymous. All transactions are monitored in there, and everything that happens on there is kept forever. The difference being on an open public blockchain, you can at least have pseudonymity. I mean, an account number is not a person.
Internet as opposed to intranet. That's what China's doing now. Their blockchain is essentially...
They want to create national intranets where they administer everything.
You know, so many millions upon millions of people have become, privy to, understanding the central banking system and the slavery that ensues because of it. I think it's going to be tough for them to completely control this because, I mean, really, as you said, there is some sense of anonymity. We're going to be able to work around it to a certain extent. I think there's going to be some cowboys out there, right?
Oh, there always are. There are always cracks in any system, and partly that is intentional because we know that, I mean, at the very least, the deep state needs their backdoors in the financial system so they can launder money and drug money and all of that. They need those backdoors. So they will exist, and a dedicated informed public that really wants to get out there and do it. There will always be space for pirates of various sorts. But it will be, like in any other age, that will be almost a leper class. You don't want to do that. You want to play ball with the system and KYC and sign all the right paperwork and make sure that you're not going to get in trouble with the man. And 99% of the population, if not more, will go along because it's the easiest way to get along.
Yeah, and I think that, ultimately for me, I've already said to myself that, if we fall under full blown, these type of controls, look, I'm going to be a pirate 100%. I will be, I'll have shipping containers full of AK-47s and ammo coming in and selling them with digital currency and everything else. I mean, I already foresee myself just not conforming to that, not at all. And I'm sure there's millions of other people doing the same.
Let me make a suggestion. Pirateswithoutborders.com.
I like that.
You can become a pirate today if you want.
All right.
So yeah, I mean, it's scary, man. It truly is. I mean, I was just having a conversation with a friend today, like you said, using all the fuzzy words of, just, you got to love the earth. And you know what I mean? Like you said, it doesn't have to be a binary thing. Of course, you can love the environment without signing on just specifically to CO2, because there's so many other conversations from water vapor to the process of the sun. I mean, we just don't give this much, which is weird. Not weird, but it's like when you say CO2, it just goes to the heart of how things grow. CO2 is a part of photosynthesis. We expel CO2, which obviously is a part of photosynthesis. So it's like humans are the problem.
Yeah.
Stop having so many.
Interesting. I mean, there's so many levels to this psyop, but one of them is that it's not CO2. No one says CO2. They all say carbon, which is not only scientifically inaccurate, but it does get to the point that we are carbon-based life forms. And it does, I think, drive home the point that ultimately this is about demonizing humanity. We do not have to conjecture about that. That is in black and white.
Which goes back to their original eugenics agenda, quite frankly.
Well, read the Club of Rome's The First Global Revolution from 1991, where they literally say that that the threat of global warming would fit the bill that they are looking for to make humanity the enemy of man. It's a crazy statement out there in black and white in 1991 from the Club of Rome. You can go look up. I bring it up often because I still don't think, one person in a million has heard of it, but it's right there in black and white. They say they want to make humanity the enemy of man, and they will use the threat of global warming to do so. What craziness, what kind of mentality is that? Well, it's the mentality, unfortunately, of people with inordinate amounts of wealth and resources to bring to bear on the topic.
Well, I even saw, what was it? Ocasio-Cortez was hanging out in her apartment drinking wine or whatever, just taking questions from people, and she was like, "Yeah, we probably should not be having as many kids." And I've even seen other just people on the news like, "Yeah, we should. That would go a long way to stemming the carbon dioxide problem. If we would just stop having as many kids, et cetera, et cetera." Which again, code word. You bring out your Captain Crunch decoder ring. It's like humans are the problem. It's just insane.
Exactly. And of course, I always get pushback from people about that. When I point this out, I call it carbon eugenics. And if you type carbon eugenics into my search bar, you can find all sorts of things I've done on this, where I've been talking for a decade plus now about sterilization programs and you don't want children. Children will be bad for the environment. They've been pushing this for a while. Now they're still trying to push it. I don't think it is organically taking off, but they're pushing these groups, the birth strike movement and other things, that they're always trying to push this in people's faces.
But again, this is kind of like China. China's so ahead of the curve with their 5G and their technocracy right now, their blockchain, et cetera. But they had their populate, only one kid or whatever it was for so long.
They had the one-child policy.
Yeah.
They got rid of it, interestingly.
Yeah.
It wasn't even exactly a one-child policy. For the rural areas, there was more children allowed and things like that. So it was never, but they did have it, and now they want to develop their economy. Now they're having more children. I wonder how that works. That actually, again, this is a whole other branch of incredibly important fake science that's been pushed on people. The overpopulation bunk that has been pushed on us for the better part of 60, 70 years now. I hope people would go back and watch my Corbett Report podcast on Paul Ehrlich. Meet Paul Ehrlich, pseudo-scientist, charlatan.
That's Obama's guy, isn't it? Obama's science guy?
Yeah, Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb and thought this going in the public consciousness. Not only is he wrong about everything. He's predicted so many things. By the year 2000, the UK will be over because the food riots and everything and blah blah blah. It's the same old Malthusian nonsense that we've been hearing for the past 200 plus years since Thomas Malthus started mouthing it. But it continues to be promoted, and people like Paul Ehrlich continue to be showered with accolades for their failed predictions, their history of nothing but failed predictions.
That's Al Gore 101, because like right now we should be all underwater and polar bears would all be dead, ice caps should all be melted, which is funny coming from a guy who had hundreds of thousands of shares from his father in Occidental Petroleum Corporation. You know, another person who's, you know, just neck deep in oil telling us how to preserve and conserve and climate or carbon credits. That's so funny. His company or with his guy, the blood guy, so it's blood and gore or gore and blood or something. That's literally the guy's name. Al Gore, and this guy, the guy's last name is Blood.
Here's the conspiracy theory for you.
Go ahead, James. Sorry.
Well, here's a conspiracy theory for you. So it's been making the rounds again. It was talked about a couple decades ago, but there was apparently press reports at the time. I can't remember which airport, but there was some airport where Al Gore's suitcase got knocked over or something, and blood poured out of it. And it was apparently, I haven't seen the reports, I haven't seen them, so I don't know. But apparently this was reported, even AP or Reuters or whatever it was at the time. Al Gore is carrying around bags of blood when he goes traveling. What's this all about? And so the theory is it has something to do with, as we now know, millionaires, billionaires have been paying for the blood of young children to be transfused into them. What's it called? Adrenochrome and all of that, right? That's an actual science.
Oh, no, absolutely. It is.
No, it's real.
So Al Gore apparently got caught out with that a couple decades ago. So here's the big conspiracy theory. All blood and gore, like literally having a co-worker or a co-investor named Blood, completely messes up the search for that particular thing. When you try to search about gore and the bags of blood, you're just going to get blood and gore kind of stuff from his company.
No, but the point that I wanted to get to is that, you know, with all of this stuff that, you know, I've had conversations with, and look, I've been in the TV industry for many years now. You know, I started out as a professional athlete and a coach, and have been involved in the television industry. And of course, the television industry has a lot of folks who, you know, lean liberal. And it's you know, the hatred of not only Donald Trump, but you know, the big corporations polluting. They don't use polluting, but when I say, listen, can we just have a common sense conversation and understand that the other side, meaning me as a conservative, doesn't want to see pollution all the way down to from the multinational corporations dumping stuff in our rivers, all the way down to somebody throwing a wrapper out of the window of their car. I don't want to see it at all. Neither do you. Let's talk about pollution. Let's stop with this human-caused global warming, because now, you know, and I had this conversation just this week with a lot of people that I work with. They're great people. They're concerned with the environment, but they have been hook, line, and sinker that it's human-caused. And I said, look, man, you know, NASA and a lot of other scientists are saying, you know, they're warning us that we're in the middle of a solar minimum, and that we're headed into a mini ice age. Okay, so can we please stop with the human causes? Maybe we bumped it a little bit, but ultimately, look, the sun is in control of our atmosphere, of our world. That's the way it is. I mean, can we just stop?
Well,
my diesel truck or my 150 V6 is not going to turn the world into an inferno. It is not.
But again, I mean, you're absolutely right. But you're just speaking straight common sense. What's going on, and as we know, this is one of those things. Kind of going back to our World War I conversation in the Milner Group. They planted that seed, and it took 15, 20, or however long for World War I to happen. These are one of those generational things that they planted the seed on in the early 1900s, and again had to change the framework of eugenics to climate change and stuff. But it's like they're never going to let that go, Pat. I'm with you, but it's like this is
at the beginning of
evolution they're going for.
At the beginning of every show that we do, we need to ask people this. We need to say, I don't care if you are a full-blown socialist, a communist, a free market believer. I don't care what your background is. Do you want the truth? And if you're presented with the truth, will you at least believe it, or will you just ignore it and keep believing what the talking heads in the media will tell you?
See,
Can I back that up?
Yeah.
Because this is the thing that frustrates me the most out of these topics that we're talking about right
How
now.
do I get you wound up?
Which are, I mean, these are the most important topics facing the world at the current time and in the foreseeable future. These are going to literally transform the way we live our lives, the economy, everything we can think about. And I consistently get feedback from people. I mean, obviously, I get a lot of pushback. Oh, you're a global warming denier and blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. I mean, I get where they're coming from, and, you know,
which is, again, that's part of the language. You're a global warming denier, which means you might be a Holocaust denier, too. That denier that.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Denier, you know, just use the word. But here's the thing that really gets to me is when people, after I've laid out the case, and I've done so many videos talking about what is the average global temperature? How is that derived? You know, where does this come from? What data sets are being used? How are those data sets manipulated? I've gone into this in so much detail. Eventually, sometimes I'll get this feedback from people. Well, James, even if it is just a big hoax, it's a good one because it's getting people off of big oil, right? No. First of all, what do you think it is that I do? I do not just, oh, that's a lie, but it's a good lie, so we better just go along with that lie. No, I don't do that. That is against everything that I believe and all of my core principles. And secondarily, if you don't understand the lie and the purpose, the reason why they are constructing this lie, you are going to be led directly into the wrong, fake, phony solution that they're pushing you. They're pushing society into. That's the point of this. And people who want a convenient lie, that really.
But that, again, that's part of the program that takes generations and years and years. You have these these millennials now who, God bless their soul, they're of that kind of, no, we just want to genuinely save the earth, not knowing the inside baseball, going back to what we're talking about, eugenics. Some of them might know, but they can't possibly and still support this and be like, yeah, we're breaking free from big oil. Like, no, dude.
Ricky tried jumping in a couple times. Ricky, what did you have to say?
I kind of forgot, but one thing I did want to get into a little bit, just to bring up before we run out of time, is, I mean, so there's obviously, I think one huge thing, and James hits on a lot, I think is very important, is that this idea that the science is settled. And you hear that with vaccines, you hear that with climate. They use climate denier the same way they use conspiracy theorists. It's like they're just, you know, basically, if you're a climate denier, you might also be talking, you know, the next conversation might be about the 9/11, or might they just, the Holocaust. They'll pigeonhole you in that. And I think it's a huge issue. But one thing, you know, I also have a little bit of, or at least I'm uncertain about if, you know, like this thing, I think the science is unsettled in both directions. I think we're not 100% sure the effect we have on the Earth, and we're not 100% sure we have any effect. And I think almost anybody who's too confident, I mean, if you look at both sides of the arguments, and since we've decided to have this this podcast, I've listened to a lot of climate debates. You know, somebody's pro, climate change, or and the other one's a denier or thinks it's a hoax or whatever. And if you look at all the statistics and all the science that they're referring to, none of it is really good, and none of it is really, you know, some of it. I mean, like James has said, some of the predictions have been so unbelievable. I remember hearing David Wallace on like a Joe Rogan podcast talking about in like, you know, just in I forget how many years that like we're gonna 50% of California is gonna be on, you know, on fire, you know, and all this stuff is gonna happen and all, you know, and it's like, you know, I think that you guys are definitely, you know, inflaming that. But I also understand that cars, for example, like if I turn my car on and I keep it running in the garage, I'm gonna die if I'm in the car, if I'm in that garage. So that has to, you know, that obviously isn't good for the environment. I also understand the corporations, you know, putting stuff into the water to save money. I mean, you look at the history of fluoride, for example, you know, it was a great way of saving some money. Let's convince people it's good for you. And that's not good either. And the problem is that it's become such a political issue where, similar to like if you're anti-war, you must be not patriotic. You must be anti-troops.
Exactly.
You must not. It's like same thing where like if you have any actual open discussion about this and you question any of the science or any of this stuff, all of a sudden you're anti-environment, you're anti, humanity, you're anti, and humans, let's be honest, we're not, there is an argument made that if you eliminated humans from the earth, they might be better off, but I also think that they're justifying, they're demonizing this stuff for the purpose of, financial gain and social control. And like everything we've been talking about, like, it's not a good lie, because all they're doing is they found a way of controlling you. At one point it was with big oil, and then they're finding a new way of controlling you. They're just like, okay, things are transitioning. We can't ride this horse forever. We know this is gonna end eventually. So they're basically like really good businessmen who are like, hey, we see the market changing. We have to go with the market. So it's like, we know we can't milk this cow forever. That oil can't be the way we control people forever. So now they're finding other ways. And this is the thing is, so regardless what you believe about the science, or if humans are having impact on the earth and the climate or whatnot. I mean, you guys have all talked to Randall Carlson, who is really knowledgeable in the history of the earth warming and cooling and stuff like that. I mean, It's quite, you talk to people like him, they understand that does happen. And before humans had factories and cars, like that did happen. We know pretty well that.
Well, and there's the geoengineering side of it too. It's like, when it's springtime, and we've just been ripped here in the Midwest with floods and tornadoes. It's spring, it's summer. That's kind of what happens. But if you go back, it's not really that much more frequent. But to just gauge it just on its own, just the natural weather, we really can't do that right now because of what we now know they're doing to the weather. They're geoengineering things to possibly create storms.
That's the major point right there, is what I've been thinking the whole time this entire spring, is that I have hardly seen the sun this entire spring. I feel like I'm in Seattle, but with thunderstorms and tornadoes. And I can tell you, look, there have been many springs where we've had tons of storms, tons of water. This one's a little unprecedented, but I do recently recall that Bill Gates and several others talking about that they're going to be seeding, they're going to be spraying, they're going to be blocking the sun's rays. A lot of that stuff was going to be picking up steam. And it seems to me that, look, does it coincide? Is it mere coincidence? Potentially, but I can tell you that I haven't seen the sun a whole lot in Iowa. And look, if they want to claim, they've already admitted that they're doing it even more now, that they were picking it up, as I said. It's working. I haven't seen the sun. It hasn't been warm here in Iowa. Global warming isn't happening.
Check my Facebook page, my homepage. It'll probably be gone by when most people listen to this. I was raised in Davenport, Iowa, not far where Pat is now. I was raised probably, how far am I from the river, Pat? Maybe 10, 15 miles?
Not even that, right?
Not even that. Someone posted a video today who now live across the street from where I grew up. There was literally, I'd say, a foot of water rolling down Colony Drive. I lived there my whole life, 19, 20 years. Never even, there was a field that got flooded every once in a while. It was unprecedented.
I'm sorry, I've literally got to get going out the door here. So let me just end with 3 things, and then you guys can wrap up. One, for geoengineering and its relation to climate change, I would suggest people look at a video I did a few years ago, Geoengineering, the Real Climate Change Threat. Yeah. Secondarily, parenthetically, I'll just say, Ricky, your closed garage door analogy suggests an equivalency between carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, and that, of course, is, I think, part of the engineered confusion around these issues. But thirdly, yes, uncertainty. There is uncertainty, absolutely, but just saying there is uncertainty gets you labeled a denier at this point and blocks off the conversation. One of the fundamental figures in all of climate science is called equilibrium climate sensitivity, which is a lot of jargony nonsense for essentially, if you double the amount of carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere right now, how many degrees Fahrenheit for my American friends, Celsius for the rest of the world, how many degrees Celsius will the global temperature rise? That is the heart of this agenda that they're trying to push on us. And not only is there great uncertainty in that figure, but that figure has been drifting downward and downward and downward in each IPCC report. Every time they come out with a report, it's a little bit lower. Oh, we thought the doubling of CO2 would be this much warming. Actually, it's a lot less warming. And they keep dialing that downward, but it continues to have this big range. Well, it can go from, 1 degree to 4.5 or whatever it is. So let's assume it's 4.5 or whatever it is. Again, this is the trick that they are pulling, as if carbon dioxide is the thermostat for the Earth, and they can dial it up, dial it down with precision accuracy. Total lunacy.
All with the price tag, my friend. All
with the price tag. It's all about the money. It's all about the Benjamins. That's what it keeps coming down to. I got to go.
And control. Thank you, man.
helping to get
James
this on the
Corbett, the CorbettReport.com, man. That was awesome. Peace, James. Thank you so much.
James, again.
Thank you, Ricky.
Man, he's such a. I love that guy, man.
Ball
I love that guy.
Yeah. And he's so well researched, and he's so willing to have the discussion. If you ever, and I've had hours and hours of discussion with James. If you ever push back on anything, like not push back, but like if you have questions and you're like, hey, what do you think about this? And something kind of goes, he's more than willing to have the discussion. He doesn't get defensive. And it's like that's what we need to do. And this is, I think, the big problem with climate change is that it really has become just a political weapon where it's just, you label people and then you make people feel like you're anti-environment if you question it, and it's
of course,
and it's not fair,
And in the world of anti-conspiracy theories, which is technically what this is, everyone looks for a shortcut to thinking. They don't want to go back to the early 1900s and the Rockefeller III and these eugenic councils that morphed into what we now know as these environmental conferences and global environmental conference boards, et cetera. So there's a lot to this.
Now, Pat and Jeff, you guys obviously. I think we all agree that this is being used for some type of social control and for financial gain and whatnot.
Right.
But even outside of that, does that necessarily mean that there couldn't be some type of climate? Because they did change from global warming to climate change because obviously all the predictions were wrong.
Man-made global warming is what it started as. Man-made global warming. Yeah.
And so do you think, what's your personal opinions on, do you think that any of the, the things like we talked about from, pollution and that type of stuff,
again, it's honestly really tough to make that designation or make that quantification simply because, like I said, we've been doing so much since the 40s to engineer the climate and geoengineering in general. It's added to what we do. I'm sure it can't help, but I think
But think about this. It's so simple because, having trained a lot of military and law enforcement, and I've had a lot of deep conversations with some pretty heavy hitters in law enforcement especially, who sit there and say, you have to think like the bad guy. And so you've got to convert over and think like one of the oligarchs, one of the multi-billionaires, the oil industry controllers, all of these people that control our energy, period. And look, the oil industry had to pretty much develop itself. Am I correct? I mean, this was not government subsidized back in the day for the most part. I mean, these people were drilling oil and making money off of it and doing their own thing. But now with the conversion, all the stuff that's going on worldwide, they are charging for the conversion into renewable energies every citizen walking the planet. And look, if I'm a guy that controls big oil, I've got a lot of power, and I can convert over into the renewable world and make the citizen pay for that conversion. What a no-brainer. I'm still going to make my money. You're still going to have your monthly heating bill. You're still going to have to pay me one way or another. I don't care how I get my money.
It's not even just paying you. What the larger context is when you start getting these carbon credits and these allotments of, no, you can only, like, based off of your consumption.
Right.
And like James says, they can manipulate those numbers. They can lower your credits. Like, oh, wait a minute, last month I had 30 credits. Now you give me 20? I used the same amount. I mean,
ultimately, that's the Al Gore game, of course, and a lot of the others. But
it's not even just the Al Gore. It's all. I mean, it's the whole thing.
Right,
the SDRs, the single drawing rights.
Ultimately, the biggest amount of money is going to come from electricity, and come from those types of renewable. Look, hey, if you want to plant hemp everywhere in the world and turn it into diesel, I'm still going to charge you for it, and that's the way it is. I don't care. I control the energy. I'm still making the money. Look, I'm going to go with the flow, but you know what's great? I don't have to pay for the infrastructure to change it over because we're charging the peasants per gallon per unit, per everything. That's what's going on that's why, all the chaos in Europe. That's why we dropped out of the Paris Climate Accord, one of the reasons, because we knew that our gas prices, Trump knew our gas prices were going to go through the roof, and he went, to hell with this.
No, you froze. Did everybody freeze? Oh, you're
Nope.
back. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I saw you.
everybody's back. Yep.
So that's what I'm saying is, look, I don't have to pay for the switchover out of my own pocket. We're just going to.
I mean, it's less even about the money, because the people who are controlling it already have, copious amounts of money. They were the ones who ran the oil industry. Now it's really about control.
Look, it's always going to be about the money also, though, because if the money starts going to somebody else, they're going to get
But
the
that'll
power.
never happen again. Look at, the Rockefellers who started this stuff from the early 1900s have divested $4 trillion and put it into sustainable energy. So, I mean, for them, it's never, I mean, the money's always nice. But again, for these guys, it's never really been about the money. Now it's about control. Because like you said, we've kind of, they've squeezed that turnip as much as they could, the whole oil thing. Now, with them morphing this notion of eugenics into these climate change conferences, et cetera, which again is about demonizing human beings. That's
In the brave new Babylon,
yes.
in the brave new Babylon, I will be Mad Max.
See, again, could that have been predictive programming back in the day? Some Mad Max?
Oh, it's just common sense.
But no, I mean, it's gonna, like you said, James is absolutely right. And I don't know how many times I've said that on the show about, this becoming one of those mega cities like Judge Dredd, and out in the outer limits is going to be the scorched earth. That's that Mad Max land right there, for sure. I see it happening, man. I mean, it's just a matter of time, in my humble opinion, because you have a lot of people, and this new generation is definitely bought on to, and even my parents and a lot, they think we're doing something to the environment. They think this warrants these carbon credits, and we've got to do something. But the solution we provide only should be based on what we think the causes are. If we think it's CO2, then our solution is going to be completely off. We're not considering water vapor and the sun.
Wouldn't the proper citizen movement that would be kinder to the environment and kinder to our pocketbooks be one way or another figure out how to get
Pat froze.
Yeah, he froze again.
He froze on us, brother.
Our own.
Nope.
He's probably making a really good point, but we just can't.
I know, right? He's sewing it up real nice. Patrick J, we missed all.
Could you hear me?
We missed all that, brother.
I'm saying that the common sense thing. Look, there's a lot of people out there that don't have the financial resources to do it, but as many as possible that can do it. Becoming energy independent on your own, off the grid, solar panels, wind power, power storage, your own well, rain storage.
We even talked about that, how they demonize that self-sufficiency, citing people for rainwater.
Look,
I'm with you. That is the solution.
If everybody who can financially do it does it, how can they stop it? Is what I'm saying.
I'm with you. I think we're too far past that tipping. I mean, they've made us so dependent on electricity and our phones and being on the grid, et cetera. It just makes it. It's almost. I'm not a big biblical guy, but 666 or the marks of the beast. You can't transact. You can't buy or sell without the mark, and the mark essentially.
I wondered what that scar on the back of your head was.
that barcode. I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. They're making it to a point where you're not going to be able to function in this particular type of mega city, like James spoke on and we spoke on, without being on the grid, without being in the system. China, again, they're already ahead of us, man. Their facial recognition technology and their social credit. You buy too much beer, you jaywalked, you eat too many hamburgers. This begins to dictate how many your value in Chinese society, and that's what we're going to, man. In my opinion.
If you look at Levittown, Long Island, where they had the first suburb built, and they were trying to basically, it was a social experiment where they were trying to get people to not be in communities where they help each other. Because I mean, the way my parents grew up on a farm in northern Portugal, and a lot of people grew up where you shared things. My parents had tomatoes, you had lettuce. We traded things, and they created this suburb, hoping that what you could do was force you to not have interactions with your neighbors, to have to go to the grocery store to get everything, to have to go to the the big box store to get a lawnmower because you don't even talk to your neighbors, so you can't borrow one, or a weed whacker. So everybody has their own thing, and it's like you look at like the gym, for example. Like we all agree that we can all be a member at a gym. We don't have to necessarily own every piece of equipment. We can all kind of share this stuff. That's kind of the mentality that small communities had, where like they shared a lot of stuff, and everybody helped each other out. And Levittown, Long Island, that whole experiment, the Levittown suburb, was like kind of the first built suburb in the U.S. and it was to push that. And I know Douglas Ruskoff, he's talked about it quite a bit. He talked about it on my show some years ago, and it's really interesting because you look at it like it makes perfect sense. Like you kind of create this American dream that is you live in the suburb with this white picket fence and you don't know your neighbors and then you have all this privacy, but there's a price you pay for that. You also don't have community, you don't have help, you don't have, so you have to, you don't have, I mean, you look at like today, you grow up, like you throw your parents in a daycare, back in Europe, what do? Or, really, I shouldn't even say Europe, any place but America, that's, an old country, you take care of your parents until they die, your family takes care of them.
They all live together.
Yeah, you all live together. You look at if you have kids, you have aunts and uncles and grandparents. Everybody helps. The whole community helps raise them. In America, no, you have to focus on work. You have to go to a daycare. So all this stuff, basically makes us more dependent on the system and having less support and less, at least family support or friendship support. So
in the U.S., I think that's definitely by design, man. I think there's been a fracturization of that family unit here for a very, very long time. And that's a very great point, man. Parents are working 10, 12 hours a day. Kids being raised by Miss Sally at the daycare unit. Oh, then you find out Miss Sally's got them in a fight club in the back with other kids. Like, it's just whatever. It's just, you just hear about these nightmare scenarios of even healthcare.
Yeah.
Pat, you've gone through it with your mother, my grandmother, straight up negligence in these facilities contributed to my grandmother's death. And it's like, it is sad. It's sad, very sad, like you said. But it's kind of, it's engineering, man. These things take so long. Like you said, we don't talk to neighbors anymore. Our kids don't talk. It is. But even, look at how we shop. We don't leave. We just go online, Amazon. We don't have to leave our house for shit.
Yeah, which there's I think so much of this is, like you said, it's by design. It's to make us less. I mean, it's funny because we think we're more social creatures because we have social media, we have all this stuff. We're actually less social creatures. Bunch of dummies walking around with smartphones, dude. And you're starting to see how it's almost like that's what happened. Like, more kids start focusing on playing video games, and they kind of, that was their interaction with other humans, was through internet or video games or social media or text messaging. But I feel like it's so not human. It's so against how we've survived as civilizations, us being social creatures, that now what do you see? You see an increase in, like, axe throwing is a big social event. People are getting together to go to different breweries and try IPAs and all this.
Let's go act prehistoric and throw axes.
But
let's get in touch with our old ancestors' self.
But I think all these events bring us together. I think, like, as much as they try, you can't fight the fact that we're social creatures. You can't fight fact that we're, so it's like you can, because you look at the people that we talked about, the people who are sold this book of lies that, like, oh, the American dream is having this giant house in a suburb where you have all this privacy and your kids go to a private school and you have a nanny and all this stuff. Those motherfuckers are all depressed. They're unhappy. They're self-medicated with pills. They, their kids end up growing up being complete disasters. Why? Because their parents weren't around. They're too busy paying for that giant house to pay for that private school. And they
got them the newest iPhone at 10 years old, which is a huge part of how we're so disconnected with our kids now. It's like their faces in a damn phone or online, or, I mean, which is fine. I'm not necessarily mind that so much, but it has to be a balance, dude. Because it's gotten really, really bad with kids. I mean, you look at any party or any social gathering, they're all head down. They're not even talking, and language is shrinking. We don't even have language anymore.
Alternate dimension, dude.
It is. Everything is freaking BRB, OMW, LOL, emoji, and I don't mind, symbolic language like hieroglyphs, but language is shrinking. Kids can't even really write anymore, like physically write.
Well, the scary part is that when you are at a restaurant or bar or whatever, and the fact that everybody's on their phone staring at it, it's almost like we've accepted the fact that we'd rather live in this virtual reality in our phone, because we're basically locked into our phones. We're scrolling the internet, whatever it may be, social media, and it's like, to us, we'd rather be there than in the present. And it's almost like we're it's
Yes.
total recall. It's like,
You know what? I was watching a guy, and we've all seen this. I was watching it. I just happened to think of that very thing. The Kentucky Derby. I was watching it. The guy had a killer seat, damn near front row seat, and he's sitting here with his phone as they're coming down the home stretch. He's sitting here taping it. I'm like, watch it live, dude. Like, you know what I mean? It's like we will take some event, some huge event, and we probably won't even watch it again. We just want to be like you just said. Basically, it's this lack of the ability to live in the present moment, man. And we see it all too much.
Well, that's why it's weird, because when you think about the idea of possibly living in some type of virtual reality, and we almost do it now. I mean, you think about how many hours people spend on their phone. So how different is it you staring at your phone for hours, or if you literally being sat down in a chair with a head unit on, some type of virtual reality glasses, and sitting there for hours, and really have no interact, like being tied up to machines where they're just giving you fluids and food and nutrition to keep your heart beating, and you're just there, and you're living in this virtual reality where you're just scrolling the internet or talking to people it's like we're not that far from that, because we're already,
remember the movie WALL-E?
Yeah.
That's what?
Oh,
WALL-E.
Yeah.
We're there, man. We're there.
Well, I mean, this is
There's
Brave New
so
World.
many-
This is Huxley wrote about this ages ago. I mean, this is it takes a
I
long
tell you
time for
what,
it to manifest, but
WALL-E, everybody was overweight in those little chairs that moved around and all that sort of stuff. I mean, they were clinically obese. I was at a swim meet with my 14-year-old who was swimming at the University of Iowa. Their facility is amazing. It has elevators in it. It's state of the. It is a massive swimming facility. I can't even tell you how big it is. Has a full 3 floors of weight facility, all kinds of stuff. Has a water park in it, but it also has diving platforms for an Olympic level event. Has a 50-meter pool. I mean, and I'm telling you, this thing. Anybody who listens to this, Google image search the University of Iowa swimming facility, and you'll go. It's the Taj Mahal of swim facilities. But the point I'm getting to is, with the movie WALL-E, with everybody living online, with people eating, processed foods and pharmaceuticals and everything else, and the health going downhill. The elevator opened. I had chairs. I had all kinds of stuff, because I'm taking my 5-year-old up to sit on a platform up above all the stands, so that she's got stuff to play with. I've got toys for her, everything else, and I can sit up there and watch my 14-year-old. The elevator opens, and we're going to go up to the 3rd floor of this thing. And there is the most obese human being I've ever seen in my life, standing in the elevator right there when the door opens. And he goes to take a step out of the elevator, and he steps on some moisture or whatever on the concrete floor, and he slips, and he starts to fall in slow motion. I'm telling you, easy 600 pounds.
what?
Starts falling forward towards my 5-year-old daughter. I quickly react. I know my daughter's going to get crushed by this. I grab her and I throw her out of the way. I put her on her feet. She doesn't get hurt. And the chairs, everything else, backpack, everything else on me. I try to stop this guy's fall. I'm a pretty strong guy. I mean, I've been physical my entire life. There was no stopping this man from falling.
600 pounds,
trust me.
dude.
Because when he fell in, I caught him kind of last minute across his chest and by his shoulder. He just went straight to the floor and hit his face and everything else and started screaming. Now I'm like, hey, listen, I go, are you okay? And he's yelling and everything. He calms down for a second. And I say, listen, can you get your hand on that ledge? And he has to turn his body and face the other way with his hands like this. His body is shaped like this. So he's doing this and rocking back and forth, moving himself and angling himself so he can at least touch this ledge that's 1 foot off the ground. And I go, I'm going to grab underneath your arm. I go, I just want you to get to your, and I'm thinking to myself, this is incredibly horrible that this guy's in this situation to begin with physically. But it's just a nightmare scenario that is repeated millions of times across this country. But I get underneath his arm and I grab his forearm with the other hand and I go, listen, I just need you to get to your knee. Just get 1 foot on the ground and your other knee on the ground. That's all I want you to do first. So we got him to there. I said, start catching your breath. I said, now on the count of 3, we're going to get you up to your feet. And he looks up at me in kind of a oh no type look. He goes, I don't think this is going to work. And I said, listen, man, this has to work. You have to get back to your feet. We have no choice because there's nobody else around right now. And he goes, okay. So I counted to 3, and I did a deadlift from hell, and we got him back to his feet. And I said, check and see if your knee's okay first. And I'm holding on to him, and he moves his feet around a little bit, and he goes, I think I'm okay. He gives me a hug, says, thank you so much for getting me back, on my feet and everything else, and then walks away. And I was just sitting there thinking to myself, this should not be happening anywhere in the world, let alone my country. And it's there's the farming of Americans. We are living in Wall-E. Go back, anybody that's listening to this, go back and watch Wall-E. We are living in Wall-E. Every time I'm in Chicago O'Hare Airport, it's Wall-E. There are so many clinically obese people in that airport and in the Midwest generally. It's disturbing, man. It's disturbing.
Well, we talked about Bill Gates briefly. I mean, Bill Gates goes around giving poor communities and places all over the world grains,
Yeah,
tons of grains.
Make them fatter.
I'm like, so you're making them fatter. You're making their joints hurt. You're causing arthritis and disease. It's pretty good science now that I mean, there's a reason why almost every diet that has gotten popular and works has the removal of grains from it. I mean, if you're paleo, if you're keto,
if you eat like
carnivore,
a caveman, right? Eat plants, roots, berries, nuts, and some lean protein that isn't fried, and you're good to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy how it's almost like, okay, we're getting these people food, but we're making them sick, so eventually we can make some money off giving them medicine, and it's this vicious cycle of just thinking you're being helped, but in the process, just like take this medication, which is going to give you these symptoms, these side effects, which will give you some other medication for.
Exactly.
It's endless, and and that's the thing. It's all about, and this is, I think, the moral of this discussion, because I think I listen to people who I really respect, like Randall Carlson, and I hear him talk about understanding how climate has changed throughout centuries and years and decades, or whatever, and it could be and is changing now. The argument can be how much. Is it dangerously changing at a speed that we should be concerned about? So there's all these question marks. And James did a short video not too long ago, a podcast on the crisis of science. I don't know if you guys watched it, but I highly recommend it. And it really goes into how much science can be manipulated, how much of it's retracted, how much of it is because we like to think like science is just, there is no opinion in science. It's all just black and white. There's facts.
No, for sure, man. And like we talked about, since they politicized this thing, about climate change, I mean, like I said, those guys have been on this. Humans are bad. The eugenicists were on it back in the day, but they realized those terms didn't get any play. So they slowly, methodically changed the conversation of humans are still bad because you're causing, global warming and causing these, trauma to the earth. So now we have to basically sanction humans for this problem. I mean, Of course, climate changes, dude. Of course it does. But those opportunistic pricks are pretty much like, ooh, wait a minute. We can coincide, the changing of climate. I don't know how much they knew that climate was changing back in the day, but basically they made it work. We could find a way to make this work and sell this, that human beings are part of this problem. Like I said, Landra Ocasio-Cortez, and I've just seen, hey, just stop having kids, and, well, it's a big hustle, dude. It's a big hustle. We got a lot of people buying it, man.
That's the scary part. Fear-mongering, and the thing is that what really makes me nervous is that we go from global warming, and then obviously when people realize, like, okay, we can't use that term anymore because it's
man-made. It started out with man-made global warming,
global warming, and then they change it. Now they call it climate change.
Yeah.
And every, like he talked about Paul Enrich or whatever his name is. He did the pseudoscience video he did. He had all these predictions that were 100% wrong, and this guy was really respected, and this scientist that was doing interviews and publishing stuff, and all his predictions were wrong. And every time they have these predictions, I mean, like we talked about Al Gore, and they're wrong, and people just keep saying, well, this time they're telling us the truth. No, this time, no, we'll believe them this time. No, this time.
And now when it's been super cold the last several years, oh no, global warming is global cooling. Like there was just snow last week in my boy's crib in Colorado, not in the mountains, but it's just insane.
Well, I'm
it's
sure
just insane how they hijack the narrative, and it just.
Look,
The media is obviously behind it, and it's so politicized. Like almost like you were saying, when you start using that oh, you're a climate denier, and it just has that immediate association to 9/11 denier, Holocaust denier. So no one.
But here's what I want. You know, Jeff, you and I have talked about this a lot. You know, the hypnotist at a comedy club who hypnotizes 25 people on stage and gets them to do whatever they want. That is the exact same thing that mass media is doing to, you know, the masses who are susceptible to just believing and accepting everything they're told. Now, imagine this, and what percentage, and I want for, you know, all those people out there that believe the mainstream media is the gospel. Somebody who happens to stumble upon this broadcast and believes that, you know, ISIS somehow appeared out of nowhere, that it had to be funded by just, you know, evil people from overseas or whatever it was, and it wasn't it wasn't Clinton's State Department, it wasn't the Obama administration, it wasn't the Bushes, it wasn't any of these other people, predecessors for Al-Qaeda. Imagine if all the networks started broadcasting this. We're talking mass Jonestown, brother. We have to save the environment. We're going to, on January 13th, we're going to send out pamphlets, emails, whatever, and the people that receive these emails, you've got to commit suicide, and we want you all to commit suicide to save the earth. We're gonna have 3/4 of the earth dead, like 3/4 of the earth's inhabitants all have to commit suicide. That's billions of people, but how many millions of people do you think would actually follow through with it?
I don't know how many, but I know they're getting it so to the point where it's a religion, and we know what kind of fanaticism can happen in religion. I could definitely see a lot of people doing that, bro. Yeah. I could definitely see a lot of people doing it. Because like I said, they've utilized a basic whatever the word is, maternal or nurturing. Of course, we all want the environment to be well, but they've pigeonholed it to just CO2. Like again, they don't talk about water vapor or the cycle of the sun, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone's bought into this. Yes, it's CO2. We're the ones doing it. Industry, et cetera, when we really don't have a fucking clue. You know what I mean? Your ice core samples back in the Middle Ages or whatever, even other times, it's been warmer. But again, it's hard to quantify now because they've been engineering the atmosphere for going on almost 100 years, probably 60 to 80 years. We had on Jim Lee, you know, the first tropical storm they invented off the East Coast in the early 40s. And just who knows what they're doing now with the chemtrails, et cetera, et cetera. So they almost could be making it come true now. I mean, this almost goes back to the Anunnaki, right? The Anunnaki were mining for gold to put gold in the atmosphere to keep the earth cool and reflective sun back. So, I mean, who knows what the hell they're doing right now, dude? But at the end of the day, we know, as long as and HARP as well. But as long as we know and get that it's a hustle to control human resources, human consumption, and eventually human beings. I mean, again, go back to check out George's why the oil? What was it again? I'm sorry. Why oil conquered the world? Why big oil conquered the world?
How big oil conquered?
There was two. There was how big oil conquered the world. Why? So check those two out, man. It's in depth, man. It really is. But it goes to the depths of this social engineering that again does not happen overnight, ladies and gentlemen. These things take decades, to fulfill their agenda.
It's more creative ways to tax people. It's more creative ways. They make money twice. They tax us to pay for the transition, then they profit off the transition.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like that's exactly what they do. It's like, hey, let's have all these new sources of energy. You guys are going to pay for it, and then we're going to profit from it because we're going to own all the businesses, and we're going to own all the grid, we're going to own all the.
But then we all eventually sign up for it. We all get our smart dishwasher, our smart TV. We just give the information.
I think Florida has laws against you can't be off the grid. I mean, you look at even if you want solar panels, you still have to. You have to sell it back to the electric company.
Right.
You still have to have some relationship with the electric company. It's like, well, why can't I just be like, no, fuck them. I make enough electricity.
Self-dependence, self-sufficiency is frowned upon, man.
Yeah, they don't want that. They want us to be dependent. They want us to be. So that's, and that's the thing. And I think that's what's so important about this discussion is that it's not about where you stand on, if we should be having some social change in the way we live or whatnot, or, the debate about climate changing or whatnot. because you can have those debates, and those debates are fine. But one thing and those don't necessarily maybe have a black and white, right down the middle, right answer. That, I think those are still discussions are still open to debate. But the one thing that isn't open to debate is that without a doubt, people are using this conversation as control and using it to manipulate people and scaring the shit out of people. So it's like, I think, that's something that people have to kind of focus on, like,
well, and they have to want to know too. We have our 30-minute, our fast food news services today, and people think they're informed. This agenda goes back almost over 100 years, man. You got to do some reading. You got to do some research. You can't just listen to Roger Maddow or anybody else tell you what the hell's going on in the world and think you have a freaking clue.
And when people like the Bilderberg Group get together, these guys are looking at
Club of Rome.
Yeah, Club of Rome. They're looking at big picture. They're looking at big picture. They understand way before the population does. Like,
they are playing chess while we all too often play checkers, man.
Yeah.
And that's again by design. And we're easily played. Again, I go back to my cover picture on my Facebook page, and I talk about it all the time. Morpheus holding up the battery in the Matrix. That's what we are, man. We're just fuel for the machine. And now they've really, we've kind of almost just conceptually been fuel to the machine. But what they're going for now, we literally are about to be fuel for the machine, and how they restrict our consumption, restrict resources. We're about to see some next level stuff. And China is a huge beta test for this. And I really wanted to ask James about the One Belt, One Road, and how these next 15, 20 years literally are going to just change as it relates to the sustainable energy stuff, because they're embracing it as well.
Well, in regards to that, had Western Europe hit China with the same tariffs that we hit China with, they would have helped us stop China from becoming the monster that they're becoming. So Western Europe is complicit to the problem, and they're assisting China in becoming this monster. And the globalists are all responsible. The past administrations who allowed this to happen. For God's sakes, even Clinton went as far as to sell, satellite killing technology to the Chinese. These are some bad people that did this. But let me tell you something as far as the controlling of government. And I'm going to tell you, I got a letter from the IRS, and it said that I had an amount due immediately. Now, mind you, the amount due immediately that they sent me was the exact amount of the check that had cleared the bank already quite a few weeks before I got this letter. And this is notice of intent to levy your property or rights to property. As we notified you before, our records show you have unpaid taxes for a tax period ending so-and-so. Immediately make payments arrangeable. Don't receive this amount due within 30 days. To date this notice, we may levy your property or rights to your property. They basically were already starting to move to steal my fucking house from me when my check had already cleared the fucking bank. That's when you realize how much power these assholes have. And look, these people at the IRS are only doing their job. I get it, but the system is broken. The system is broken
for sure.
And anyone with that kind of power to just come in and steal my house when I've already made the payment, number one. And two, if anybody out there listening, the benevolence of government, if I wouldn't pay it, they'd seize my house, and then they would kick me out of my house. And if I refused to leave my house and I fought back with a gun, they'd fucking kill me.
Damn, Wesley Snipes, you better pay your taxes.
But this is what I'm talking about. And this amount was already paid, and the check had already cleared many weeks before I ever got this letter. So I'm telling you right now,
well, I think,
when I listen to Ron Paul and all the other people talk about get rid of the IRS, get rid of the Federal Reserve, all this other stuff, this is the reason why. This is the reason why, because it's scary shit. When you get a letter like that and you've already paid them,
and obviously that's almost another whole conversation. People don't even realize that the income tax was literally ruled unconstitutional. Direct tax on income was ruled unconstitutional numerous times by the Supreme Court prior to 1913 and the Income Tax Act or whatever the hell it was. But that's, of course, the same year the Federal Reserve Act was passed. So that's when they started shutting it down. But yeah, a direct tax on income was ruled unconstitutional quite a while ago, but they made it happen anyway.
Yep. So that's my rant. That's my rant.
No, that's fucked up, man.
No, I think people need to be reminded of that, because I think when you're not in the crossfire of the government, you don't realize the bullies they can be, how they can ruin your lives. And it's really easy to just kind of go on with your day. And, you know, when you don't happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, or you don't happen to piss off I mean, the government, and I try to tell people this all the time, like, the government is just like the mob. Just like the mob. You owe them money for services you didn't want, and then you know, and then if you don't pay them, they ruin your fucking life. You know, so it's like, how is it any different than a mob? Like, it's, you know, and that's
it's the same. It's the exact same. But again, like you said, nobody really cares. It's almost like whatever, killing people fucking throughout the world in illegal wars. No one really cares unless it happens to them, because until then, you know, you could just sit around, do nothing, make Facebook Live twerk videos, and, you know, just do dumb shit. You know what I mean? But until it hits you right in the face, then, you know, makes it a little bit more real. But that shouldn't have to be what happens. You know what I mean? We should still, that in that story Pat just described, that's the kind of the preemptive stage. The IRS has been doing that to people for, you know, years and years and years. But, you know, I don't want to piss off the IRS. Not that I did anything wrong, but I guess you don't have to piss off the IRS.
Yeah.
Dude, this has been awesome, man. I don't know, Pat, you need closing statements? Ricky, anything to close this bad boy out?
Good, buddy.
This was a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that I think, at least my personal opinion is that I don't really have one on the solutions or what's causing the problem, or if there is a realistic problem that has to be, I guess, you know, creating this giant social change immediately. I think a lot of it is scare tactics. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be some truth to some science out there. But I think people need to be skeptical.
But at the end of the day, like anything else in life, man, if your premise on what's happening is off or is wrong, your solution's going to be fucked up. Absolutely. So we really, like we said, get to the basis of why this is happening. You know, again, that's how are we going to monitor? Yeah, it is. I mean, again, it's like, well, of course we probably have an impact on, I mean, not to, whatever. Things change, you know, and we probably change environments. Is it to the point that they're talking about right now? I don't know, and we're never really going to get it, because what they've been doing with the atmosphere and the, you know, engineering of the, you know, atmosphere and weather, et cetera, et cetera. But
ultimately, think of the blip in time that we are.
Yes,
I mean, if mankind nuked themselves out of existence, the Earth would recover in a couple.
Well, I mean, what they say about volcanic ash thrown up in there. So many volcanoes pump up so much CO2, way more than we ever do. I mean, we've been seeing so many volcanoes pop off. They say way more CO2 than humans have even produced being human. So, like, when they linchpin it to CO2, we got to get past that. Let's talk about the sun. Let's talk about water vapor. You know what I mean? Don't let them control the narrative of what we know is happening, climate change. But, you know, what's the true nature of it? Are we doing it? Is it CO2? And if it's not, then let's find other solutions, or just recognize we can't control the sun. Like Pat said, fucking sun controls all of our weather. But it has definitely been politicized, and it's some dangerous stuff, dude. Because like Pat said, I can honestly see some, not literal Jonestown scenario, but we have some zealots out there like that who just won't let the CO2 thing go. Their own little self-hatred of being a human being is visceral.
Millions would off themselves for the cause, dude.
Possibly.
Because they believe media. They would believe the media, and they would do it, thinking they were doing the right thing. That's how easily sold the American public.
Track it down, ladies and gentlemen. Like anything else, key bono, who benefits in this? Go back to the conversations with eugenicists back in the early 1900s, the Rockefellers, etc. We're not making this up. It's not a conspiracy theory. Just do your own research. Yeah, but Ricky, thank you so much, bro.
Thanks.
Good talking to you, Ricky.
www.theconspiracyfarm.com. The website is up. Your one-stop shop for all Conspiracy Farm stuff, episodes, killer sponsors, a little bit of gear. Ricky, man, thank you so much. Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, and I haven't. I've had a busy weekend, so I haven't got back to you in regards to that the last email, because I know there's a lot of information there, but I'm definitely interested. And you know, we'll just have to go through the details and stuff like that. But that sounds awesome. I mean, you know,
for sure. Like if you don't know, now you know. We are starting, or we pretty much have been scheduled and tasked to pretty much schedule a radio station, a talk radio station with about 1 million+ listeners here in the Midwest, Eastern Iowa, Western Illinois. It's really going to be awesome. The lineup we are assembling, brother. We want you a part of it. And,
heavy hitters.
Heavy hitters.
Home runs.
We've never seen a lineup like this in the history of terrestrial radio. So we are assembling some hitters like yourself, man, to help get this information out there. Not to say we're right all the time, but just to be able to have these discussions. You just don't hear it on controlled radio.
Because doing research, even for this podcast, every video, every article was either for or against. You know, you're either a denier or you believe every single piece of science that's out there and all these ridiculous predictions.
Right.
And one thing that I love about our discussions, how often we say, well, yeah, we don't know, but, you know, like, we're undecided in a lot of times because that's the way.
That's what people don't get. Everyone's so confirmation biased. They have to be right, and it's not even really about that, man. It's about the exchange of ideas of maybe hearing something you didn't know about before that makes you scratch your head, like, oh, well, I just didn't think about it that way. We have to stop defending these confirmation biases that are just sometimes erroneous, man, and just be able to talk to people and take the ego out of it. Again, the whole "I have to be right." It's such some ego tripping bullshit, dude. I mean, there's so much more information that can be gathered when you're just like, oh, wow, I didn't look at it that way.
Yeah, well, no, and you're right. It is influenced by ego. I mean, we have created a culture where if you're wrong or if somebody corrects you, it's almost like we look down upon you like you must be a dummy, you know? And instead of looking at it like, oh, shit, I was wrong, so now I got some good information, and now I'm one step closer from figuring this thing out or having a better researched opinion on this topic. It's like we shouldn't look down upon somebody.
You know, a lot of that conversation, I'm not even going to try to touch it really right now, but it's way existential. But a lot of people's need to be right is not just ego, but it's a fear of death. That's a whole, again, another conversation. But
sounds deep. Yeah, that's
it is.
Yeah, I never even thought about it that way, but I'm gonna have to ponder on that after this podcast.
It's some deep shit. But thank you, man, Patrick.
Thanks,
Love
guys.
you, brother.
Hey, thanks,
Good to
guys.
see you.
Hey,
Thank you, Ricky.
we'll definitely all get together soon. And
once the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll send you the video and audio, and you know, and hopefully I'll get it to you soon.
Yeah, peace and love. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
brother.
guys.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care. Yep. Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.